My name is Jonathan Reed. I'm 61 years old, and last week my own son threw me out of the house I raised him in. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just dropped a suitcase at my feet and said, "You're done here. The money's mine now." He had just gotten a $30 million inheritance from my late uncle, a man he never visited, never called, never respected. And the moment that money hit his account, my son looked at me like I was nothing but dead weight. I spent the night in a cheap motel off the highway, replaying his words, trying to understand how a child I fed, clothed, and protected his whole life could turn on me so fast. But the truth hit me the next morning when my accountant, who never calls before noon, rang my phone at 7:14 a.m., saying, "Jonathan, listen carefully. Your son has no idea what he's done. That $30 million he's celebrating? It legally belongs to you. If he spends even $1, he could face federal charges." I stood there staring at the motel wall, realizing my son hadn't just betrayed me. He had lit a match to his entire future, and he didn't even know it yet. I wasn't going back to his house for an apology. I was going back to show him exactly who really held the power. I left the motel in the same clothes I'd worn the day before, the same wrinkled shirt my son told me made me look old, and I drove straight to the only person who could untangle the mess he'd created. My accountant, Wallace, worked out of a quiet office above an insurance agency, a place so plain most people walked past it without noticing. But Wallace was the kind of man you only underestimated once. When I walked in, he was already standing with a folder in his hand like he'd been pacing for an hour. "Jonathan, sit," he said, and the tone in his voice made my stomach tighten. I sat. He opened the folder and slid a stack of documents toward me. "Your son filed a change of control request on the inheritance last night. He transferred $200,000 into a new checking account and tried to open an investment fund with the rest. That triggered the audit." I felt my jaw tighten. "I didn't know he did that." "Of course you didn't," Wallace said. "He thought he was smart. He thought he was acting as the sole beneficiary. But your uncle's trust wasn't written that way." I leaned forward. "Explain it to me plainly." Wallace tapped the top document. "Your uncle put the entire inheritance in an operating trust controlled by you. You are the trustee, the executor, and the financial controller. Your son is not the heir. He is a contingent recipient, and only if certain conditions are met." "What conditions?" I asked, even though I already sensed the answer. Wallace sighed. "He must maintain a stable relationship with you, remain under your advisement for business decisions, and cannot make any major financial move without your approval. If he violates any of that, the trust reverts entirely to you." My throat went dry. "He violated all of it within an hour." "Exactly," Wallace said. "And here's the part he really didn't know. If he accesses funds without authorization, it counts as misappropriation of controlled trust assets. That's federal. If he starts spending freely, he could be charged." I rubbed my face with my palms. "My own kid," I whispered. "He told me he didn't need me. He kicked me out of my own home." Wallace nodded, not unkindly. "And he made it very easy for you to take everything back." I sat there for a long moment, staring at the carpet, trying to understand how my life had pivoted so sharply in 24 hours. I didn't raise a greedy child, or at least, I didn't think I did. But money exposes people. It reveals the things they hide when they're still poor enough to pretend. "What do you want to do?" Wallace asked. I looked up at him. "I want to see him," I said. "Not to scream. Not to argue. I want to see the expression on his face when he realizes the fortune he kicked me out for wasn't his to begin with." Wallace slid a second folder across the desk. "Then you need this." I opened it. Inside were copies of the trust documents, the violation notices, timestamps of his unauthorized transfers, and, most importantly, the letter of revocation. With my signature, everything reverted to me. Every cent. Wallace lowered his voice. "He's not just legally in danger. He's financially ruined if he keeps going. You need to get ahead of him before he digs the hole deeper." I nodded slowly. "I intend to." I left Wallace's office with a plan forming so clearly in my mind it almost frightened me. My son didn't want a father anymore. Fine. He was about to meet the man who built a company from a $900 loan and outmaneuvered competitors who had twice my resources. He'd forgotten who taught him everything he pretended to know. As I drove back toward the neighborhood I'd raised him in, I replayed every memory I had of him. His first bike, his college graduation, the night he cried in my arms after his fiancée left him. I remembered how I told him I would always have his back. And now he'd shoved me out the door like a stray dog. I wasn't proud of the coldness settling in my chest, but I didn't stop it. I parked a block away from the house because I didn't want him to hear my truck pull up. The sun was setting behind the roofline, painting the windows gold, the same windows I had washed myself when we first moved in. I walked toward the house quietly, the folder tucked under my arm, and with every step I took, I became less of the father he knew and more of the man he should have feared. And when I reached the front door and heard laughter inside, his laughter, I knew exactly how this was going to play out. I knocked once, steady and hard. The kind of knock that came from someone who wasn't asking permission. The door opened halfway, and my son stood there with the same smug expression he'd worn when he told me to get out. He was barefoot, hair messy, wearing one of the t-shirts I bought for him years ago when he still cared about simple things. Behind him, I heard music, the TV running, someone laughing. He didn't even try to hide the fact that he was celebrating. "What do you want?" he asked, leaning his shoulder against the doorframe like I was a salesman interrupting his evening. I kept my voice calm. "We need to talk." He scoffed. "About what?" "I already told you, your stuff is in storage. You can pick it up Monday." I felt that sting in my chest, but I didn't let it settle. "This isn't about my stuff," I said. "It's about the money." His expression tightened just a fraction, just enough to tell me he was worried. "Good." He crossed his arms. "What about it?" I lifted the folder slightly. "You and I need to sit down. You're making moves you don't understand, and if you keep going, you're going to ruin yourself." He barked out a laugh. "Ruin myself? Dad, I'm rich. You don't get a say anymore. You had your chance to run things. Now it's my turn." He tried to close the door. I put my hand on it, firm but not forceful. "Jonathan," he snapped, using my first name like I was a stranger. "Stop. You don't live here anymore." "I'm not doing this." Something in me shifted. I stepped forward. "I'm not asking your permission," I said. "Let me in." He hesitated, just a split second of uncertainty, but it was enough. I pushed the door open with my shoulder and walked inside. He followed behind me angrily, whispering curses under his breath. The house looked different. Messier, louder, more expensive, and somehow cheaper at the same time. Half-empty champagne bottles on the counter. A stack of unopened packages near the sofa. A giant new TV mounted crookedly on the wall. My son walked in front of me, arms wide. "Look around, Dad. This is my life now. I don't need your advice or your approval. I'm doing things my way." I placed the folder on the kitchen island and looked at him steadily. "Sit down," I said. "No," he shot back. "I'm done listening to you. You controlled everything when I was a kid, and now you want to control this too? Forget it." "Fine," I said, opening the folder. "Then just listen." He rolled his eyes, but didn't walk away. I pulled out the first document. "This," I said, tapping the page, "is the inheritance agreement. The trust. The contract." He snorted. "I know what a trust is. I talked to the bank." "No," I said quietly. "You talked to the teller, and she told you whatever you wanted to hear. You didn't talk to the trust manager. You didn't talk to the executor. You didn't talk to anyone who actually understands what your uncle set up." He straightened slightly, his arms dropping a little. I slid the second document toward him. "The trust isn't yours," I said. "Not yet. Not the way you think. Every dollar is tied to my position, my approval, my oversight. I'm the trustee, not you." He stared at the page. His mouth twitched. His bravado slipped. "What does that even mean?" he asked. "It means everything you've done in the last 24 hours was unauthorized." I kept my tone level. "The transfer, the new accounts, the spending, all of it. Those actions triggered an audit. And if you keep going, they'll trigger federal fraud charges." His face changed, just slightly, but enough for me to see the fear crack through. "No," he said, shaking his head. "That can't be right." The lawyer said. "Which lawyer?" I asked. He said nothing. I nodded. "You hired someone cheap who told you what you wanted to hear. Someone who didn't even bother reading the structure of the trust." I slid the revocation letter forward. "This is the part you didn't expect. Your uncle put a contingency clause in. If you cut ties with me, disrespect me, or financially harm me in any way, the trust reverts to the primary holder, me." He looked at the page like it was written in a foreign language. "That's not possible," he whispered. I shrugged. "It is. And you activated it when you kicked me out." I let him sit with that reality, let the weight of what he'd done sink into the bones he'd inherited from me. "You said you didn't need me," I said quietly, "that I was done. And in saying that, you cut off the only thing that made the money available to you." He backed up a step. No, you can't do this. You wouldn't." "I didn't do it," I said. "You did." His chest rose and fell faster, anger mixing with fear. So what now? You take everything? You ruin my life? I didn't ruin anything, I said. But I'm not going to let you burn yourself alive with money you don't understand. So what? He snapped. You came here to gloat? I shook my head. I came here to give you one final chance before I sign that letter and take back everything your uncle gave. His eyes flicked to the paper. The panic was rising. The weight of consequences was finally beginning to land. What chance? He asked quietly. I closed the folder. Sit down, I repeated. And listen carefully, because your next words decide the rest of your life. His jaw clenched. His breathing slowed. And slowly, reluctantly, he pulled out a chair and sat. That was when I knew this wasn't going to be simple. He wasn't just confused. He wasn't just arrogant. He was hiding something. Something big. And whatever it was about to turn this situation into something far darker than I ever imagined. He sat there with his hands flat on the table like he was bracing for impact. And for the first time since this whole thing started, he actually looked his age, not like a cocky 28-year-old who thought he'd hacked life, but like a scared kid who'd backed himself into a corner. I didn't say anything at first. Silence is its own kind of pressure, and I'd learned over decades of negotiating that if you let people sit in it long enough, the truth starts clawing its way out on its own. Sure enough, his eyes dropped to the folder, then to his fingers, and he let out a breath. You don't understand, he muttered. Try me, I said. I built my life on numbers and risk. Start talking. He swallowed, his throat working. It's not just me, okay? I already committed some of the money. My jaw tightened. To who? He hesitated, scratching his knuckles the way he did when he was a boy caught lying about breaking something in the house. Investors, he said finally. What kind of investors? I asked. Real ones, or guys who call themselves investors when they really mean something else? He flinched slightly. That told me more than anything he could say. I met them through a friend, he rushed on. They've got this crypto portfolio, real estate, high-yield stuff. They said if I came in with serious capital, I'd be at the table with them, not just taking scraps. I told them I'd have access to the funds within a week. His voice dropped lower. I already signed preliminary agreements. I closed my eyes for a second. You signed binding commitments on money that's not legally yours. He snapped back defensively. I thought it was mine. You were the one who didn't tell me how the trust was set up. You kept that from me. Your uncle kept that from you, I said evenly. He saw what greed did to his own brothers. He swore he'd never let that happen again. He didn't know it would skip a generation and land in you. That hit him. He winced, but the anger came right back to cover it. You're loving this, aren't you? He said, eyes flashing. You get to sit there and lecture me about greed while you hold the paperwork that makes me your puppet. You always wanted control. I leaned forward, my voice low. If I wanted control, I would have never let you walk out of here last night. I would have frozen every asset before you had a chance to touch it. Instead, I spent the morning trying to make sure you don't end up in prison for acting like a fool in front of the wrong people. He looked away toward the living room, where the TV flickered silently with some sports recap. They're not the wrong people, he muttered. They're powerful, connected. They know how money works. Powerful, connected people don't need desperate kids with new inheritance, I said. They need someone stupid enough to be the fall guy when everything collapses. He swallowed again. I could see the gears grinding in his head, all the bravado grinding against the reality he couldn't ignore anymore. How much did you already move? I asked. Exactly. He hesitated. 200,000, he said. And I promised I'd send another 5 by the end of the week. They're already talking about a bigger play. They said if I backed out now, I'd be done. Blacklisted. They don't like disloyalty. The way he said that last word told me he wasn't just worried about his reputation. He was worried about his safety. Names, I said quietly. I want names. He shook his head quickly. No, they're not going to come after you. This is my thing. I'll handle it. Just give me access. We'll triple the money. Everyone wins. I laughed once, a humorless sound. You think this is about profit? This is about you handing control of 30 million to people who saw you coming from a mile away. He clenched his jaw and stared at the tabletop. You're so sure they're villains? He asked. Maybe they're just doing business. You know what legitimate investors do when they hear trust fund? They ask about structure, risk, and terms. You know what predators do? They ask when you can send the first wire. That shut him up. He sat there for a moment, then whispered, they don't like questions. They said if I didn't trust them, I wasn't ready for real money. I could feel my pulse in my temples now. So you tried to prove you were ready by throwing your father out of his house and declaring the money yours. He looked up sharply, like he wanted to argue, then deflated. I was tired of being the kid, he said quietly. Tired of being the guy everyone thought only had what he had because of you. This was my chance to be something without your shadow. I studied him. For the first time, the arrogance had a shape I recognized. It wasn't just greed. It was resentment and insecurity all knotted together. You wanted to prove you were a man, I said. And you did the one thing no real man would ever do. Betray the person who raised you to get there faster. He flinched like I'd hit him. So what now, he snapped. You go to the feds? You let them lock me up? You sit on your throne with your precious trust and tell everyone you were right about me? If I wanted to ruin you, I said, I wouldn't be sitting at this table warning you. He didn't respond to that, but something softened a fraction in his eyes. I drummed my fingers once on the folder. Listen carefully. You are already on a radar you don't want to be on. The audit flag is raised. Wallace reported irregular activity. The trust managers have a duty to notify federal regulators if this continues. The only person who can keep that from spiraling is me. So help me, he shot back. You're my father. I tried to help you, I said. When you were 16 and wanted to borrow 10 grand to impress a girl. When you dropped out of grad school because you thought flipping sneakers was your destiny. Every time, I bailed you out quietly. You called it support. You never saw the pattern. I was creating the net. You were jumping without looking. I tapped the revocation letter. This time, there is no quiet bailout. Not without a cost. He stared at me, breathing harder now. What cost? I held his gaze. You signed 3 things. 1, an admission that you accessed funds without authorization and that you understand the trust belongs to me. 2, a full list of every person, platform, and investor you've spoken to about this money. 3, a personal agreement that you will not touch another cent of this trust without my written approval. His face twisted. You want me to sign myself back into childhood? Is that it? I want you to sign yourself out of a prison cell, I said flatly. Those are your choices. You don't get a third option where you keep playing big man with someone else's fortune. He stood up abruptly, chair scraping. I knew it, he said, voice shaking. You couldn't stand the idea that I got something without you. You're punishing me. I stood up too, slower, calmer. You punished yourself the minute you chose strangers over your own blood. He turned away, pacing, running his hands through his hair. They're expecting the money, he muttered. You don't get it. If I pull out, I look weak. They'll cut me out of everything. I'll be a joke. You already are a joke to them, I said. You're the guy with access. That's all. Once they drain you, you're gone. If they find out the money was never yours, trust me, the last thing you should be worried about is your pride. He stopped pacing and stared at me, something desperate and ugly in his eyes. And what if I don't sign? He asked. What if I walk away, keep my accounts, move the rest before anyone can stop me? I picked up the folder and held it loosely at my side. Then tomorrow I sit down with Wallace and the trust managers, sign this revocation, and let the system do what it does. Every transfer you make gets flagged. Every contact you sent money to gets examined. You become a case file. And those people you're so scared of, they'll be a lot less friendly when the authorities start asking them why they were receiving misappropriated trust funds from a kid who never had real control over them. He didn't say anything for a long time. The house was suddenly very quiet. Even the TV seemed muted somehow, as if the whole place was holding its breath. Finally, he whispered, You'd really do that to your own son? No, I said. You did that to yourself the moment you chose them instead of talking to me. I'm just refusing to cover it up for you. His shoulders slumped. He pulled out the chair again and sat, his anger drained for the moment, leaving only exhaustion. What do you need me to do? He asked softly. I placed a pen on the table between us. Start by telling me everything. I said. Every call, every meeting, every promise you made. Then we decide how much of this mess is survivable. He glanced at the pen, then at me. And as he reached for it with a shaking hand, I realized something else. The money wasn't the only thing my uncle had handed me. He'd handed me the chance to finally stop rescuing my son from his own worst instincts and force him to see exactly who he'd been becoming. But I also knew this wasn't just between us anymore. Those investors weren't going to vanish because he signed a few pages at our kitchen table. They were going to want answers. They were going to want their deal honored. And when they found out the trust had snapped back into my hands, they weren't going to come after him first. They were going to come for me. I knew the moment he signed those papers that the situation had shifted, but not in the comforting way you'd expect. Yes, legally, the trust snapped back to me. Yes, the financial disaster was contained. Yes, my son had finally admitted the scale of the mess he'd walked into. But there was something hollow in the way he signed his name, like he wasn't convinced the danger was real, like he still believed those men were business partners, not predators. And that scared me more than anything, because his denial didn't change the fact that they were going to want answers when the money didn't arrive. I walked him through the immediate steps, freezing the transfers, notifying Wallace, locking down all outgoing wires. But even as I was doing it, I could see him drifting into that stubborn tunnel vision he'd had since he was 15, the one where consequences didn't exist, and he was invincible. He kept saying, "They'll understand." And every time he said it, the knot in my stomach pulled tighter. By evening, he'd gone upstairs to lie down, his mind clearly overloaded. I sat alone in the living room, lights dim, listening to the refrigerator hum and the ticking of the wall clock, small sounds that suddenly felt too loud in the silence. I was rehearsing what I'd tell the trust managers in the morning when I heard it, the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. Slow, deliberate, not the casual roll of a neighbor or a delivery truck. I set the file down. Checked the time, 9:41 p.m. Nobody we knew would show up unannounced at night. A second later came the soft thump of car doors closing. 2, maybe 3. My pulse picked up. I stepped to the window, angling the curtain just enough to see outside without catching the light. A black SUV sat in the driveway. Not oversized, not flashy, the sort of anonymous car businessmen used when they didn't want attention. 3 men stood beside it, one leaning against the hood with his hands in his pockets, one on the passenger side checking his phone, and one, tall, broad shoulders, looking straight at the house like he already knew exactly where I was standing. I let the curtain fall back into place and took a slow breath. So this was it. They didn't wait for missed payments. They didn't wait for explanations. They came in person. That told me everything I needed to know about who they were. Upstairs, my son didn't make a sound, meaning he didn't hear them, or he thought it was nothing. Either way, it didn't matter. I wasn't about to let him face them. I walked to the foyer, flicked off the hallway light, and opened the door before they had a chance to knock and wake the whole house. The man with the broad shoulders stepped forward first. He was in his 40s maybe, clean cut, wearing a suit that didn't scream luxury but definitely wasn't cheap. He smiled, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was one of those polite expressions that didn't reach the eyes. "Evening," he said, hands still casually in his pockets. "Sorry to drop by so late. We were in the area and thought we'd touch base with your son about a business matter." I nodded once. "He's resting. Whatever business you have, you can say to me." His eyebrow lifted slightly. "Are you involved in the deal?" "More than he is," I said. That shifted the air immediately. The other 2 men exchanged a glance. Broad Shoulders gave a small chuckle, not disrespectful, but probing. "Funny. He told us he controlled the account." "He doesn't," I said. "Not anymore." Another pause. A small, subtle tension pulled into their posture, like they were recalibrating the entire conversation. "So the wire transfer," he said slowly. "That's not happening." I didn't blink. "Correct. And the remaining funds he promised?" "Also not happening." He exhaled, the polite mask thinning. "That complicates things." "For who?" I asked. "For everyone," he said. "We made arrangements based on his commitment. He told us the capital was secured. Said it was family money." "It is," I said. "Mine." The silence that followed wasn't long, but it was deep. One of the men shifted his weight slightly, the kind of micro-movement men make when they're preparing for things they don't like. Broad Shoulders nodded once, the way a man does when he's accepting information he doesn't enjoy but recognizes as unavoidable. "All right," he said, voice calmer. "Then let's be direct. We need assurances. Your son signed agreements. Early-stage commitments. We can't move forward without clarity." "You'll get clarity," I said. "Right now." I stepped forward, closing the distance by just an inch. "He doesn't have control. He won't have control. And any agreement he made with you is void because he misrepresented his legal authority." His jaw tightened just slightly. Misrepresentation is a serious accusation. So is soliciting funds from someone who can't legally provide them. That landed. The other 2 men shifted again. This wasn't a threat. They knew what I meant. One complaint from me to the right agency, and their little circle would be investigated from every angle. Broad Shoulders studied me with a different expression now, not irritation, not intimidation, evaluation. He was recalculating who he was dealing with. "I see," he said finally, nodding slow. "So what happens next?" "Next," I said, "you walk back to your SUV, Leave this property and forget my son ever spoke to you. He doesn't have access to anything you want." He looked at me for a long moment. "You're calm about this," he said quietly. "Most parents panic. Most parents don't understand money," I replied. "I do." For a moment, no one moved. Then he gave a small, tight smile, not friendly, not hostile, but acknowledging the end of a negotiation. "We'll be in touch," he said. "Don't be," I answered. He held my gaze a moment longer, then turned. The three men walked back to the SUV without another word, climbed in, and pulled away slowly, not rushed, not defeated, just reconsidering. The kind of exit that tells you the conversation isn't really over. The kind of exit that means they'll talk, regroup, and maybe decide they don't like being told no. When the taillights disappeared down the road, I locked the door and leaned my hands on the console table, letting a breath go I didn't realize I'd been holding. Upstairs, my son still hadn't stirred. He had no idea those men had been 10 feet from our front door. No idea how close he'd come to a very different ending. And as I stood there in the quiet house, one thing became painfully clear. The problem wasn't just that he'd betrayed me. The problem was that he had no idea what kind of people he had walked into. And now those people knew where we lived. I barely slept that night. Every time a car passed on the street, every time the house creaked, every time the refrigerator clicked on, my mind went straight back to the three men standing in my driveway. Calm voices, polite faces, but everything beneath it sharp as glass. And the worst part wasn't that they came. It was that they came without threats. Men like that don't raise their voices. They don't make scenes. They don't break down doors. They talk softly because they expect people to listen. And they expected my son to deliver. Now he couldn't. And that meant they had a problem. At sunrise, I walked downstairs, made coffee, and tried to plan my next steps. My son finally came down around 8, looking groggy and irritated, not like someone who'd nearly stumbled into a federal nightmare. "Did you talk to Wallace?" he asked, opening the fridge like nothing had happened. "I left him a message," I said. "He'll call back." He pulled out orange juice and drank from the bottle, something that would have gotten him grounded for a week when he was 17. "Good," he muttered, "because those guys are expecting a timeline. We need to stop," I said gently. He didn't. "I know you think you understand how this works," he snapped. "But this is real business, Dad. I can't just back out." "Yes," I said calmly. "You can. And you will." He slammed the fridge. "You don't get it. They're expecting. They already came here last night." He froze. His whole body stiffened like someone had poured concrete around him. "What? 3 of them?" I said. "They pulled into the driveway around 10. His eyes widened. Shock first, then fear, then denial. "No," he said, shaking his head too quickly. "No, they wouldn't. They said they'd call first." "They didn't." He swallowed hard. "What did they say?" "They wanted clarity about the money. I gave it to them. They left." He ran both hands through his hair, pacing, breathing fast. "Jesus. No, they weren't supposed to come here. They weren't supposed to." I stepped in front of him. "Son," I said, voice steady, "you need to tell me everything you promised them." He hesitated, and that hesitation told me everything. It wasn't just the 30 million. He finally looked me in the eyes. "It was supposed to be a partnership," he said. "A startup investment. Real estate. They promised I'd be part of something big." I nodded. "And what did you promise in return?" He hesitated again. "Too long." "All of it," I said quietly. "Didn't you?" His jaw clenched. "Not all of it. Just most. Like 25 million. 25, I repeated, feeling my stomach sink. "You told them you had full control of $25 million. They said we'd triple it." He shot back, defensive. "They said it was a sure thing." "They're lying," I said. "They always lie. That's how people like that operate." He shook his head violently. "No, Dad, you don't understand. They're connected. These aren't random guys. I know exactly who they are," I said. "And that's why you're going to stay away from them." He stared at me like he wasn't sure whether to be angry or terrified. "If I back out," he whispered, "they'll come after me." "They already came," I said. "Last night." He sat heavily at the table, his head in his hands. I messed up. I messed up so badly." I sat across from him. "Yes," I said softly, "but I'm not leaving you to clean it up alone." He lifted his head. "So what do? We cut contact. Block numbers. Change your phone if we have to. And then we let Wallace and the trust managers clean up the paperwork." He shook his head. "It's not that simple." "It is," I said. "You think these guys are dangerous?" "You're right. But the moment they realized you weren't the decision maker, they lost half their leverage. And the moment they realized I am the decision maker, they lost the rest. Why? He asked. Because I'm not a kid with a fantasy, I said. I'm a man with lawyers, records, and a legal paper trail that protects every dollar. He didn't speak, just stared into the table. Get dressed, I said. We're going to Wallace's office. He looked up sharply. Now. 2 hours later, we were sitting in Wallace's conference room, a room lined with framed degrees and thick binders of estate law. Wallace was pacing, glasses in hand, reading the rushed file I'd emailed him at sunrise. This isn't good, he muttered. Not illegal on your end, but the situation is complicated. My son sank lower into the chair. Are the men dangerous? He asked. Wallace didn't answer immediately. He set his glasses on the table. Let me put it this way, he said. If men like that think they're being cheated, they don't sue. They show up. My son let out a shaky exhale. Great. Wallace turned to me. You did the right thing handling it calmly. But this won't just go away because you told them no. They'll try again. People like that always try twice. I nodded. So what do you recommend? Wallace pulled out the thick trust binder, flipping through it rapidly. First, we reinforce the legal barriers. Freeze every associated subaccount. Notify the compliance officers. Make the trust airtight. Second, we document every interaction your son had with them. Dates, times, promises, texts, everything. My son rubbed his face. What if they don't accept that it's over? Wallace met his eyes. Then they'll escalate. And if they do, they won't come for the money. My son swallowed. Then what? Wallace sat down, his voice low and serious. They'll come for leverage. I felt my pulse pick up. Meaning? Wallace looked at me, then at my son, then back at me. Meaning they'll aim for the only thing they think still belongs to them. My son frowned. Which is? Wallace folded his hands. You. The room went still. For a moment, neither of us spoke. But in that silence, something inside me clicked into place. A mix of anger, clarity, and a strange, cold calm. They didn't want my son anymore. The moment they realized he had no control of the money, he became useless. And now, their eyes were on me. Wallace leaned back. Jonathan, I need you to take this seriously. They'll make contact again. And when they do, they won't be polite. My son looked at me like he was finally seeing the consequences he'd unleashed. Dad, I didn't know. I nodded slowly. I know, but something in me had already shifted. Because if those men wanted leverage, if they wanted control, if they wanted the person standing between them and millions of dollars, they were coming for the wrong man. We left Wallace's office with the weight of reality pressing on both of us. My son kept glancing over his shoulder as we walked through the parking lot, like he expected those men to step out from behind a car. I didn't blame him. That's exactly how men like that operate. Quiet, patient, always watching. We got into my truck, and for a moment neither of us spoke. He stared out the window, jaw clenched tight, hands fidgeting in his lap. Dad, he finally said, voice thin, why didn't you tell them to stay away for good? Why didn't you threaten them with the feds or something? I pulled out of the parking lot slowly. Because threats only matter to people who fear consequences, I said. And those men don't. He turned toward me. Then what do? We prepare, I said. And we wait. We drove in silence for a few miles until my phone buzzed in the console. Unknown number. Not good. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it buzzed again. Same number. Then a text. We just want to talk. Quick call. My son saw the screen and went pale. It's them, he whispered. Don't answer. I won't, I said, but I saved the number immediately. If they wanted to play this smart, I had to play smarter. We went home, and for the first time in years my son followed my lead without arguing. When we stepped inside, I locked the deadbolt, pulled the curtains halfway, and checked the backyard. Nothing. No cars. No movement. No signs of visitors. But the silence felt too heavy, like the house knew something was coming. My son sat at the kitchen island, bouncing his leg, twisting his fingers. I messed up so bad, he said under his breath. Why did I think they were legit? Why did I? Because you're young, I said. Because they knew exactly what to say. Because they're professionals at spotting someone who wants to feel important. He dropped his head. I didn't want to feel important. Yes, I said gently, you did. And there's nothing wrong with that. What's wrong is the kind of men who take advantage of it. Another buzz. Same number. Another text. We're stopping by. Don't make this difficult. My son jumped up. Dad, they're coming here again? Not if I stop them first, I said. Get your things. Why? Where are we going? Somewhere they won't follow. He stared at me like he didn't believe I had a plan. But I did. I always have a plan. That's what 30 years of running a company teaches you. Problems aren't solved by panic. They're solved by preparation. I grabbed the folder from Wallace's office, a jacket, my keys. Within minutes we were in the truck again, pulling out before the men arrived. I drove straight to the one place nobody expects a wealthy man to go. A rundown diner on the edge of town with peeling paint, flickering neon, and parking lot potholes big enough to snap an axle. It was loud inside, clattering dishes, clanking pans, the smell of grease and burnt coffee. Perfect. Noise is safer than silence. The back booth was empty. We slid in, and I kept my back to the wall so I could see the door. My son sat across from me, hunched and exhausted. "Why here?" he asked. "Because nobody follows a man into a place where nobody looks rich," I said. "The waitress brought us coffee without asking. They always do at places like this," and I leaned forward. "Listen carefully," I said. "Those men are not coming for you anymore. They're coming for me. And they're coming because they think I'm the only thing standing between them and $30 million. He swallowed. "Are you?" "Yes," I said. "But they made one mistake." "What mistake?" "They think I'm vulnerable." Before he could respond, the bell over the diner door jingled. My son stiffened immediately. I didn't turn right away. Raising your head too fast is the quickest way to show fear, but I caught the reflection in the chrome napkin dispenser. Not them. Just a couple of truckers in heavy jackets. Good. I sipped my coffee and continued. "They're going to reach out again," I said. "Probably tonight. Maybe through a different number. Maybe through someone else entirely. They'll try politeness first. And when that fails, they'll switch to pressure. Pressure like threats. Not at first," I said. "Pressure like making themselves impossible to ignore." He rubbed his palms on his jeans. "Then what?" "Then," I said calmly, "we build our own leverage." He frowned. "What leverage?" "The financial kind. The legal kind. The kind that gets men like them to back off when they realize they've chosen the wrong target." He leaned in. "Dad, I need to know something." "What? Are we in danger?" I didn't sugarcoat it. "Not if you listen to me." He nodded slowly. "Okay, I'm listening." I opened Wallace's folder and slid a specific page toward him. "This is what they don't know," I said. "Your uncle's money isn't clean. Not entirely. Some of it came from partnerships those men were involved in years ago. Partnerships that ended badly. If they push too hard, we bring that history to the IRS." My son blinked. "You do that?" "I'll do whatever keeps you safe," I said. Just then, the diner door jingled again. This time I did look, but subtly, pretending to glance at the ceiling fan. 2 men walked in. Not the same 3 from last night. But the type was similar. 2 well-dressed for the diner. 2 aware of their surroundings, scanning the room in a way ordinary people never do. My son noticed them too. "Dad," he whispered. "Are those?" "No," I said quietly. "Not them. But not nobody." They sat 2 booths away. Didn't order food. Didn't take off their jackets. Just watched the room. My son was shaking. I put a hand on the table, palm up, steady. "Breathe," I said. "They aren't here for us. But remember how this feels. Because this is exactly what those other men want." He nodded, swallowing hard. "Then what do we do?" I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice. "We stay 2 steps ahead. We don't go home tonight. We don't answer unknown calls. And tomorrow morning, we go to the bank." "Why the bank?" he whispered. "Because the only thing those men understand is access. And I'm about to shut every door they want to walk through." He looked at me like he wasn't sure if he should be scared or relieved. And I understood. Because as I watched the 2 men in the corner booth pretend to read menus, I realized something important. This wasn't a story about money anymore. This was about control. And if those men wanted to test how far I'd go to protect my family, they were about to learn something they never expected. They weren't the only ones who knew how to fight. We left the diner an hour later, stepping into the cool night air that smelled faintly of diesel from the highway. My son kept glancing over his shoulder, trying to pretend he wasn't afraid. Fear stiffens a man's spine in one of 2 ways. It either makes him reckless, or it makes him obedient. For the first time in his life, my son chose obedience. We got in the truck, and I didn't start it right away. I just sat there, key in hand, watching the diner door in the rearview mirror. "Dad," he whispered, "are we being followed?" "Not yet," I said. "But they'll try again, and when they do, I want to be ready." He swallowed, nodding like a child trying to look grown. I finally turned the key and pulled out of the parking lot, taking a different route than the way we came. 2 lefts, a back road, no main highway. If anyone had eyes on us, they'd lose us in seconds. My son watched the road signs blur past, hands clenched on his knees. "Where are we going?" he asked. "Somewhere nobody thinks to look," I said. "Your uncle's cabin." He blinked. "The cabin? That place is falling apart." "Exactly," I said. "That's what makes it useful." The drive was long and winding, 40 minutes into the woods, the kind of area cell service dies and headlights feel too bright. My son looked uneasy the deeper we went. "Dad," he said quietly, "do you think they'll come out here?" "No," I said. "Men like them don't like uncertainty. Forests are uncertainty." The gravel crunched under the tires as we pulled up to the old cabin, weathered wood, sagging porch, a place my uncle used for solitude and bad cigars. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. It smelled like dust, pine, and the faint lingering scent of old tobacco. My son flicked on the single overhead bulb that buzzed like a trapped bee. "We're staying here?" he asked, wrinkling his nose. "For tonight," I said. "They can't follow what they can't track." I checked the windows, tested the locks, made sure the place was as secure as a creaky forest cabin could be. My son collapsed onto one of the old couches, rubbing his face. "Dad, I'm trying to understand something." "Go ahead," I said. "Why didn't you tell me any of this sooner? The money, the trust, the cabin, everything." I leaned against the table. "Because you weren't ready." He looked up, eyes tight. "You think I am now?" "You're learning," I said simply. "Fear teaches faster than comfort ever could." He gave a quiet, humorless laugh. "Yeah, I'm learning that $30 million is the worst thing that ever happened to me." "Money doesn't change people," I said. "It exposes them." He nodded slowly. "Then what did it expose about me?" "I didn't sugarcoat it. That you weren't prepared for power. That you thought money makes you untouchable. That you trusted the first men who talked to you like you belonged." His eyes dropped. "And what did it expose about you?" I answered without hesitation. "That I know how far I'll go when someone comes for my family." Before he could respond, a soft vibration buzzed against the table. My phone. Unknown number again. This time, a voicemail. I played it on speaker. A man's voice, calm, controlled, the kind of voice that never rushes. "Jonathan, we're disappointed you've made this difficult. We know you're with your son. We know you've been advised to ignore us. But here's the problem. That trust isn't stable. The moment anything suspicious happens, the IRS steps in. And if they step in, all of you lose. We're offering a solution. A simple conversation. Tomorrow. Noon. Neutral ground. You choose the place. But if you don't respond by 9 a.m., we'll choose for you." The message ended. My son stared at the phone like it was a venomous snake. "Dad, they know we're together." "Of course they do," I said. "That was the point of the message." "What point?" "To unsettle you. Not me." He stood and paced the small room. "So what do we do? Do we go? Call the cops? Call Wallace?" "No," I said. "Wallace can't fix what they're after. The cops don't care unless there's a crime, and right now, there isn't one." "So then what?" "Then," I said, "we choose the battlefield." He stopped pacing. "What does that mean?" "It means tomorrow at noon," I said, "we meet them, but not to negotiate." "Then what?" "To show them exactly why they should walk away while they still can." He stared at me like he wasn't sure if I was being serious. "Dad, they're dangerous." "So am I," I said. He sat down slowly, processing that. I waited until the silence settled, then walked to the small cabinet in the corner. Inside was a dusty metal lockbox my uncle kept tucked behind old maps. I dropped it onto the table. My son frowned. "What's that?" "Insurance," I said. I unlocked it. Inside were documents. Records. Photos. Ledger pages. My son leaned forward. "What is all this?" "Proof," I said, "that your uncle's old partners, including those men, were involved in things that could put them away for decades." He stared at the papers like they were radioactive. "Dad, why do you have this?" "Because your uncle trusted me," I said. "Because he knew one day someone would come for what wasn't theirs. And because he knew I'd be ready." My son exhaled slowly. "So you're not planning to fight them with fists?" "No," I said, closing the box. "I'm planning to fight them with fear." "Fear," he echoed. "Yes," I said. "The same thing they came to use on us." The overhead light flickered. The wind outside rattled the loose shutters. My son sat back, finally understanding. This wasn't desperation. This wasn't running. This was preparation. "Dad," he said quietly. "Yeah. Tomorrow, if something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong," I said. "Because tomorrow isn't their victory." He swallowed. "Then what is it?" I looked at the lockbox. At my son. At the dark forest outside. It's the day they learned the money was never the only thing that belonged to me. The cabin was quiet the next morning, the kind of quiet that sits heavy in the air, thick enough to feel. My son hadn't slept. I could hear him shifting on the old couch all night, breathing fast every time the wind hit the windows. I slept lightly, but I slept. Fear keeps most people awake. It sharpens me. When dawn finally pushed a faint gray light through the filthy cabin blinds, I stood, stretched my back, and checked the time. 7:02 a.m. 2 hours until I had to answer the men who threatened us. My son sat up, rubbing his face. "Did you sleep?" he asked. "Enough," I said. "We've got work to do." He looked around, as if expecting danger to be hiding in the corners. "Are we staying here until the meeting?" "No," I said. "We're leaving soon." "Where are we going?" "Somewhere I can make a point." He followed me outside into the cold morning air. The forest was still, dew clinging to the grass, the world looking almost untouched. But danger doesn't care about scenery. I unlocked the truck and tossed him the keys. "You're driving." His eyebrows lifted. "Me? Why?" "Because you need to learn how to keep control under pressure. And because if anyone is watching for my truck, they'll expect me behind the wheel." He hesitated, then nodded and climbed in. He wasn't a terrible driver, but nerves make hands stupid. I watched him white-knuckle the steering wheel as we pulled away from the cabin, taking a winding back road heading toward town. "Dad," he said as we drove, "do you really think meeting them is a good idea?" "It's not a good idea," I said. "It's the necessary one." He swallowed hard. "What if they try something? If they wanted us dead," I said, "they wouldn't have left a voicemail." He nodded slowly, not convinced but trying to be. We drove in silence for a while, the trees thinning out as we got closer to civilization. At the edge of town, I told him to turn into a wide gravel lot behind an abandoned hardware store. The building was rotting, windows boarded, roof sagging. He glanced at me. "Why here?" "Because this," I said, stepping out of the truck, "is where your uncle taught me the first rule of dealing with dangerous men. Always choose a place they can't predict." I walked toward the back of the building where a metal door with peeling paint stood half-rusted into the frame. I pushed it open. Inside was a dark, empty storage bay with a concrete floor and hollow echoes. "This is the meeting spot?" my son asked. "No," I said. "This is the test." He blinked. "A test for who?" "For you." I stepped into the middle of the room and set the metal lockbox on the ground. The lid was shut, but the weight of everything inside seemed to fill the entire space. "Your uncle used to ask me one question," I said. "A question that decided whether someone could handle the responsibility of the trust." My son straightened. "What question?" "What would you do?" I said quietly. "If someone tried to take everything from you?" He looked at the lockbox, at me, then back again. "I'd protect it," he said. "How?" "I don't know. I'd fight for it." "Fight how?" He hesitated. "Dad, I'm trying. Try harder," I said, not unkind but firm. "Because that's the difference between survival and failure." He paced in a slow circle, thinking. "I'd expose them," he said finally. "I'd show the world what they're really doing." "Good," I said. "But then what?" "I'd cut them off. Make sure they couldn't come near me again." "Better," I said, "but incomplete." He stopped pacing. "Then what's the right answer?" I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "The right answer is, you make sure they regret ever thinking you were weak." His expression shifted, fear mixed with understanding. "Dad, this isn't about violence," I said. "It's about power, position, leverage, everything those men tried to use against you." He nodded slowly. "And today we use it against them." I closed the lockbox and picked it up again. "Get in the truck," I said. "It's time to choose our battlefield." We drove back onto the main road, and my son kept his eyes on the rearview mirror, searching for shadows that weren't there yet. The town faded behind us until the highway opened up, stretching toward a quiet industrial district. "Why are we going this way?" he asked. "Because we're not meeting them in a restaurant or a parking lot," I said. "We're meeting them somewhere they can't lie." "Where's that?" "The bank." His eyes widened. "The bank? Why?" "Because everything they want traces back to accounts, transfers, signatures, and paper trails. And paper doesn't lie." He looked out the window. "Dad, if they show up at a bank, they must be either stupid or confident. Or," I said, "they think I'm scared enough to be sloppy." "Are you?" he asked. "Not even close." We reached the bank 20 minutes before noon. It was one of those old regional branches, brick walls, green awning, outdated signs that hadn't been replaced since the early 2000s. I parked in a spot facing the front door. My son turned to me, nervous. "Dad, what's the plan?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and spoke calmly. "We don't raise our voices. We don't threaten. We don't explain. We let them walk into a room where every piece of evidence is already against them. And if they try to corner us, they won't," I said. "Not here. Banks have cameras. Cameras have archives. And dangerous men don't like witnesses." He exhaled, a shaky breath that showed he was trying to trust me. "What do I do?" "You follow my lead," I said. "And you watch how people really behave when they realize the money isn't theirs." Right at noon, a black SUV rolled into the parking lot. My son's face went pale. Two men got out. The same two from the house. Sharp haircuts, tailored jackets, the kind of confidence no one should trust. They stepped toward the bank entrance, scanning the lot, looking for us, looking through us. I opened my door. "Showtime," I said quietly. My son froze for a second. Then he swallowed, nodded, and stepped out beside me. We walked toward the door together. And as I reached for the handle, I told him one final thing. "Today," I said, "you're going to learn the part they never expected." "Which part?" he whispered. I pushed the door open. The part where we stop running. Inside, the bank was cool and quiet, all polished tile and soft, echoing footsteps. The kind of place where people lower their voices automatically, where money feels heavier just because of the walls around it. My son stayed half a step behind me, his shoulders tight, his eyes locked on the two men as they followed us in. They didn't rush. They didn't posture. They walked like this was just another meeting on their schedule. Nothing more, nothing less. That told me they'd done this before. At the reception desk, the teller looked up with a polite smile. "Good afternoon. Welcome, Jonathan Reed," I said calmly. "We have a noon appointment with Mr. Collins in compliance." Her smile shifted to something more formal. She tapped a few keys on her terminal, then nodded. "Yes, Mr. Reed. He's ready for you. Conference room 2. She gestured down the hallway. That was important. I hadn't asked for a regular manager. I'd asked for compliance. The people who don't care about customer service. The people who only care about red flags. We walked down the hall, our footsteps muffled by the carpet. The men stayed close, but not too close. Like they wanted to hear everything but pretend they weren't listening. In reality, they were listening to every word. At the end of the hallway, a door with a frosted glass panel stood half open. I pushed it the rest of the way. Inside, a rectangular table, 4 chairs on each side, one at the head. A man in his 50s with thin glasses and a tie a shade too dark for comfort stood when we entered. "Mr. Reed," he said, extending a hand. "I'm David Collins, compliance officer." I shook his hand. Firm, steady. "Thank you for seeing us on short notice." He glanced at my son, then at the two men entering behind us. "And these are..." The taller of the two stepped forward, easy smile in place. "Associates," he said. "We're here to assist with a transaction Mr. Reed's son initiated." Collins didn't smile back. He didn't shake their hands. He just nodded politely and gestured to the chairs. "Let's sit down." We did. I chose the side facing the door. My son sat beside me. The two men sat opposite. Collins sat at the head of the table with a tablet, a notepad, and a manila folder already laid out. He'd prepared. That meant he'd already seen what I sent him earlier that morning. The trust structure, the attempted transfers, the flagged activity. He glanced at me first. "So," he said, voice neutral, "why don't you start by explaining the purpose of this meeting?" I folded my hands on the table. "Simple," I said. "My son here attempted to authorize a series of transfers from a trust he does not control to individuals he represented as business partners. He misrepresented his authority. The bank flagged it. I asked you here so that everyone in this room understands exactly where the legal lines are drawn." The taller man leaned forward slightly, his smile tightening. "With respect," he said smoothly, "there may be some misunderstanding. Your son assured us he had full discretionary authority over those funds. We merely prepared vehicles to receive them." Collins looked at him for the first time, eyes flat. "And you are?" "Thomas," he said. "Just Thomas." "Last name?" Collins asked. Thomas hesitated. "Barely. Unnecessary," he said. "We're not opening accounts here. We're just here to clarify timetables." Collins clicked his pen. "In this building," he said calmly, "full names are never unnecessary." The other man shifted, annoyed. Thomas exhaled slowly and gave a surname that, to my ear, sounded like an alias. That was fine. The bank didn't need their real names for this. They just needed enough to write a report. I opened the metal lockbox and pulled out a smaller folder. Not the full history, not yet. Just a taste. I slid it across the table, not to Thomas, but to Collins. Before timetables, I said, I'd like Mr. Collins to see why these transactions were a problem. Thomas frowned. We've already been vetted by other institutions, he said. We're not some fly-by-night operation. You're right, I said quietly. You've been around a while. That's half the issue. Collins opened the folder. Inside were 3 documents. A copy of the trust deed showing my name, not my son's, as sole trustee. A summary of the flagged attempted transfer to an offshore entity connected to one of the men. And, most importantly, a scan page from my uncle's old ledger, one that listed a partnership with a company the men were tied to years ago, annotated with the words, "under investigation," in my uncle's precise handwriting. Collins' eyes moved over the pages. Slowly, carefully. His expression didn't change, but the air in the room did. He looked up. Mr. Reed, he said, this offshore entity, when did your son first make contact with them? 6 weeks ago, I said. Around the time he learned of the inheritance. And the trust structure, to be clear, gives him no authority over principal transfers? None, I said. He's a contingent beneficiary, not a trustee. He cannot initiate movement of funds. He cannot pledge them. He cannot promise them to third parties. Collins nodded once, then turned his gaze to Thomas. Did you know that? He asked. Thomas gave that easy smile again, but the edges were fraying now. We operate in good faith, he said. We accepted his statements at face value. If there's been a miscommunication, we're happy to step back and reassess. A miscommunication? I repeated. You approached a 28-year-old with no prior portfolio, no track record, no documented authority, and immediately arranged for multi-million-dollar transfers to a structure even my uncle flagged as risky. The second man, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. His voice was lower, less polished, with a hint of impatience. Look, he said, you can make this as dramatic as you want, but at the end of the day, nobody's committed a crime here. No money moved. Nobody's been hurt. Your son just got excited. We're willing to walk away clean. Collins set his pen down. That's not entirely accurate, he said. From the bank's perspective, the attempt to move funds under false authority is a serious matter, regardless of whether the transaction completed. We are obligated to file certain reports when we see patterns like this. Thomas's jaw clenched. Reports to who? Regulators, Collins said. FinCEN, possibly the IRS. It depends on how our internal review categorizes this. The room went very still. That was the moment the men realized they weren't sitting across from a scared old man and his foolish son. They were sitting in a building wired directly into the federal nervous system, with a compliance officer who suddenly saw them as a liability. Thomas glanced at me. Mr. Reed, he said, voice softer now, we're reasonable men. We're not looking for problems. We simply saw an opportunity and took a meeting. If your son mischaracterized his position, that's unfortunate, but it doesn't have to be the end of the world. You're right, I said evenly. It doesn't. As long as everyone in this room accepts one simple truth, the money is mine. Not his. Not yours. Mine. And it's staying that way. He watched me, calculating. You're making a lot of assumptions about us, he said. You don't know who we know. I know who my uncle knew, I said. And that ledger in front of Mr. Collins says enough. Collins tapped the page. This notation, he said, the reference to an ongoing investigation. The dates line up with several suspicious activity clusters from a decade ago. Offshore shells, layered transfers, all of it. We've seen this pattern before. The silent man shifted again, agitation bleeding through his composure now. We didn't come here to be interrogated, he snapped. Then you came to the wrong building, Collins answered calmly. Thomas leaned back, exhaling slowly, then leaned forward again, his eyes locked onto mine. What do you want? He asked. Specifically, there it was. The surrender beneath the surface. Dangerous men don't say, what do you want, unless they've recognized the balance has shifted. I didn't make them beg. I kept it clean. You will have no further contact with my son, I said. No calls. No messages. No intermediaries. You will treat every conversation with him as if it never existed. And you will not, under any circumstances, attempt to use his name in association with any of your ventures. He absorbed that. And in return, I said, I do not request that Mr. Collins escalate these reports beyond what's legally required. I do not dig deeper into your prior arrangements with my uncle. I do not hand over the rest of what's in this lockbox to the agencies who would be very, very interested in it. Now his eyes hardened. So that's it. You threaten us? No, I said. I inform you. Threats are promises of what might happen. I'm talking about what already has. I nodded toward Collins. He's already seen enough to justify oversight. The moment you walk out of this building, you can consider yourselves flagged. But I am willing, for my son's sake, to keep that flag from turning into a spotlight. For a long moment, no one spoke. The bank's air conditioning hummed. A printer whirred faintly somewhere beyond the glass walls. Finally, the quieter man muttered something under his breath, then looked at Thomas. Thomas stared at the folder, at Collins, at me, then at my son, who, for once, didn't try to talk his way out of anything. He just sat there, wide-eyed and silent, the reality of what he'd tangled with finally clear. Thomas nodded once, slow. We don't walk away from opportunities, he said, but we do walk away from exposure. You've made your point, Mr. Reed. He stood. The other man followed. We'll consider this matter closed, he said. I leaned back. Not consider, I corrected. Accept. His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He gave Collins a final glance. You'll do what you have to do, he said. So will we. They walked out of the conference room, their exit silent but not defeated, more like men recalculating, as if they'd just realized the board they were playing on wasn't the one they thought. I watched them go, then looked at Collins. You'll file? I asked. Absolutely, he said. And Jonathan? Yes. You did the right thing bringing this directly to us. Most people wait until it's too late. My son exhaled like he'd been holding his breath for an hour. So that's it, he asked. We're safe. I closed the lockbox and stood. For now, I said. From them. I picked up the box and headed for the door. My son hurried to follow. Then what's left, he asked. I paused in the doorway and looked back at him. What's left, I said, is the part nobody else can fix. Because the strangers were gone, the danger from outside had been contained. The only thing left between me and peace was the one person who had started all of this, my own son. And confronting a room full of predators in suits was nothing compared to what I knew I had to say to him when we got home. We drove home in silence, the tension in the car thicker than anything that happened in that bank. The men were gone, the legal danger was contained, the money was safe, but none of that fixed what my son had done. When we walked into the house, he lingered in the doorway like he wasn't sure he was welcome anymore. For once, he didn't speak first. I set the lockbox on the kitchen table and looked at him, really looked at him, not as the boy I raised, but as the man he'd turned himself into. Dad, he finally said, voice cracking, I didn't know. I didn't think. That's the problem, I said quietly. You didn't think. You didn't ask. You didn't even look at me before you decided $30 million mattered more than your father. He swallowed hard, tears he was too old to hide gathering on his lashes. I was stupid. I got caught up in it. I thought this money meant I didn't need anyone. It never meant that, I said. It meant responsibility. It meant caution. It meant legacy. And instead of honoring that, you almost handed our family's history to criminals. He sat at the table, head in his hands. Dad, I'm so sorry. I let the silence settle, not as punishment, but as truth. Then I sat across from him. I'm not cutting you out, I said. But things change. You won't touch the trust again. You won't make promises you can't keep. And you won't ever speak to me the way you did when you threw me out. That version of you ends today. He nodded slowly, like he finally understood the weight of everything. I won't fail you again. I stood and rested a hand on his shoulder. Don't say it, I told him. Show me. And for the first time since he ordered me out of my own home, he met my eyes, not with entitlement, not with arrogance, but with something I hadn't seen in years, humility. That was the moment I knew the war was over. The money was safe. The danger was gone. And my son, finally, was growing up. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below, and don't miss more thrilling stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.